No assistant lasted a week working for her. Not one. 11 people walked into that executive suite with ambition, professionalism, and a belief that hard work would be enough. 11 people walked out broken. Some cried in the elevator. One filed a complaint that cost the company $40,000 to quietly disappear. The last one didn't even come in person. She resigned by email at 6 in the morning before anyone arrived, because she could not make herself walk through those doors one more time. And then they gave the job to the janitor. Not a temp, not a placement from a premium staffing firm. The man who replaced the printer cartridges. The man who restocked the oat milk. The man the powerful executive had pointed at in a crowded hallway and asked in front of colleagues, in front of witnesses, in front of a junior analyst who would never forget the look on his face, what exactly he did there that couldn't be done by a reasonably trained golden retriever. He said 4 words in response, quiet, unhurried, the voice of a man who has been in rooms where the cost of losing composure was measured in something heavier than pride. He said, "Whatever you need, ma'am." And he stayed. That should be the whole story. A humble man absorbs humiliation and survives a difficult boss. Except for one problem. On the night a real threat entered that building, on the night a man with a fraudulent credential and 14 months of documented rage came through a service entrance, the janitor stopped being a janitor. Law enforcement arrived to find him already in position, already communicating in a register they recognized, already standing between the woman who had humiliated him and every exit in the room, with the particular stillness of someone who has done this before. Not once, not twice. A decorated career's worth of times. The lead detective asked him afterward which firm he was with. He said facilities. The detective looked at him for a long moment and did not argue. If you believe that dignity doesn't require an audience, and that the most dangerous people in any room are the ones with nothing left to prove, stay with this story, because what happens next will redefine everything you think you know about power, humility, and what it means to protect someone who never deserved your protection in the first place. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone absorb public humiliation with more grace than the person delivering it deserved? Because that's exactly where this story starts. To understand how one man ended up standing between a CEO and her worst nightmare, still in a facilities uniform, still unbothered, still exactly who he had always been, we need to go back 3 weeks. To a Tuesday morning when a quiet man with a level and a framed certificate was in the wrong hallway at exactly the wrong time. He arrived at 5:53 in the morning, the same as every day. The lobby of Meridian Capital Group was quiet at that hour. The security guard at the front desk nodded without looking up. The cleaning crew was finishing the marble floors near the elevators, their mop handles clicking against the baseboards in a slow, steady rhythm. The air smelled like floor polish and the faint chemical sweetness of the overnight HVAC cycle. Marcus signed his name in the facilities log, clipped his badge to his collar, and walked toward the supply room. He did not take the main elevator. The service elevator was slower and smaller and opened onto a different corridor. Marcus had learned in his first week which hallways the executive staff used and which ones they didn't. He stayed in the second category, not out of shame, out of efficiency. It was faster to move through a building when nobody stopped you to ask for things that weren't your job. He loaded his cart replacement toner cartridges for the 3rd and 5th floors, 2 replacement keyboards, a box of name placard inserts that someone in accounting had requested 4 days ago. He checked the work order sheet. 12 items. He arranged them in the order he would need them, floor by floor, so he would never have to backtrack. Carlos was coming off the night shift when Marcus reached the executive corridor on the 14th floor. Carlos ran the morning crew, had done it for 9 years and spoke to Marcus the way men speak when they've shared a break room long enough to know each other's rhythms without needing to know each other's stories. "14th's done," Carlos said. "Accept the award." Marcus looked down the hallway. The framed industry recognition near the end of the corridor had tilted again. It tilted every 2 weeks. The wall anchor wasn't holding correctly, and no one had submitted the maintenance request to fix it properly, so Marcus rehung it when it needed rehanging and said nothing about the anchor. "I'll get it," Marcus said. Carlos pushed his cart toward the elevator. "Have a good one." "You too." That was the whole conversation. Marcus found that sufficient. He worked through the first 8 items on his list before 7:15. The building filled slowly around him. Junior analysts arriving early to get ahead of the day, the coffee station on 12 beginning its first cycle, the muffled sound of a television news broadcast from someone's open office. Marcus moved through all of it like he moved through most things, present, unobtrusive, accounted for by no one. His phone buzzed in his pocket at 7:41, a voice memo from Imani sent the night before. He had been in bed when it came through and hadn't noticed until now. He pressed play with his thumb and held the phone close to his ear. Her voice was businesslike in the way of 9-year-olds who have decided something is important. She said she had been practicing her presentation every night that week. She said she needed him to be there in the front, not the back, because the back was where parents sat when they weren't really paying attention. She said she had been working on her speaking voice, and she wanted him specifically to tell her whether it was better. She said she loved him. She said not to forget. Marcus saved the memo without responding. He would call her after school pickup. He already knew where he was going to sit. He reached the 14th floor at 8:40 and walked to the end of the corridor where the framed award leaned its familiar 3 degrees to the left. He lifted it from the wall, checked the anchor still insufficient, and began repositioning it. At 8:47, something changed in the building's atmosphere. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was the quality of the sounds that were already there. Voices dropping, a phone call ending mid-sentence, footsteps adjusting their pace. Marcus had learned in a previous life to read the pressure of a room before he could see inside it. He registered the shift the way you register a change in wind. His hands continued their work on the wall. He heard a door open at the far end of the corridor. Then another. Then the brisk particular rhythm of heels on polished floor that covered distance without appearing to hurry. Through the glass panels of the offices along the corridor, he could see heads turning, not dramatically. The small, careful way people turn when they want to know what's coming without being seen to look. A voice reached him before she did. Clipped. Controlled. The control doing exactly enough work to contain something that would otherwise be very loud. Marcus kept his eyes on the wall. He had 3 more items on his morning list. The anchor still needed a proper repair request. Imani's presentation was in 2 weeks, a Friday, and he had already put in for the afternoon off. The footsteps were close now. He reached up to make the final adjustment to the frame, and then they stopped. She was taller than he expected. That was the first thing Marcus registered. Victoria Haynes came around the corner at a pace that suggested the hallway was already too small for whatever she was carrying. And she stopped when she saw him the way a person stops when they encounter furniture that has been moved without their permission. She looked at him, not at his face. At him, the uniform, the cart, the level still in his hand. 4 people had followed her around the corner. Linda Cho, from HR, 2 senior staff Marcus recognized from the elevator, and 2 junior analysts he had seen but not spoken to. They fanned out slightly behind Victoria, the way people do when they want to be close to power without being responsible for what it does. Nobody spoke first. Victoria let the silence build for a moment, the way someone does when they are very good at letting silences do work for them. Then she said it. "You." What exactly do you do here that couldn't be done by a reasonably trained golden retriever? One of the senior staff made a sound that was almost a laugh. Another looked at the floor. The two junior analysts went very still. One of them, a young woman with close-cropped hair and a yellow notepad tucked under her arm, did not look at the floor. She looked at Marcus. Marcus took the level off the wall. He set it on his cart. He turned to face Victoria fully, and he looked at her with an expression that the young analyst could not immediately name. It was not shame. It was not anger. It was something quieter and older than either. The face of a man who has stood in far more dangerous hallways than this one, and found, each time, that losing composure was a luxury he could not afford. "Whatever you need, ma'am," he said. His voice was low and even. No edge in it, no performance. Victoria held his gaze for one more second, then turned and walked back the way she had come. The senior staff followed. The hallway emptied in the way hallways do after someone powerful has moved through them. The young analyst was the last to go. She paused just long enough to look at Marcus one more time. Then she turned the corner and was gone. The hum of the building came back. Somewhere below them, a phone rang twice and stopped. Marcus returned to the wall. He was finishing the adjustment when he heard footsteps coming back, lighter this time, faster. Linda Cho appeared at the end of the corridor and walked toward him with her arms crossed and her chin slightly lowered, the posture of someone delivering an apology they know is insufficient. She stopped a few feet away. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "That was not appropriate." Marcus said nothing. He was not inviting more. Linda glanced toward the corner where Victoria had disappeared, then back. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that I understand if the answer is no." He waited. She explained the situation in careful, efficient terms. The assistant was gone. The role could not remain empty. The firm's contracted temp agency could not place someone until Thursday at the earliest, and Thursday was 4 days away. She did not say that 11 people had lasted an average of 5 weeks each. She did not say she was out of options. Her voice said both things anyway. Marcus asked 2 questions. The first was about hours. Linda gave him a range that was technically reasonable and practically meaningless, because anyone who had ever worked on that floor understood that the hours listed in any document were a starting point, not a limit. The second question was whether the assignment had a defined end date. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, said she would do her best to ensure the arrangement was temporary. That was not an answer. Marcus looked at the frame on the wall. Level now. Straight. "Okay," he said. Linda exhaled. "Thank you. I'll have the paperwork to you this afternoon." She walked away quickly, the way people do when they want to leave before someone changes their mind. Marcus put the level back on his cart. He had 4 items left on his morning list. He finished them. That evening, the drive to school took 38 minutes in traffic, and Imani was waiting on the front steps with her backpack on both shoulders, the way she wore it when she had things to say. She climbed into the passenger seat, and the download began before he had pulled away from the curb. She talked about her teacher, about a disagreement at lunch, about the presentation, how she had decided to use a poster board instead of the computer, because poster boards didn't freeze. She talked about the font she wanted to use on the poster and whether purple or green was more serious and which one he thought. He said green. She said she thought so too. At a red light on Piedmont, he told her about the reassignment. He kept it simple. New job in the building. Temporary. Helping an executive with her schedule. Imani thought about this. "Is she mean?" she said. "She's having a hard time," Marcus said. Imani looked out the window for a moment. "That's not the same thing," she said. The light turned green. Marcus drove, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that, because she was right. Monday arrived the way difficult things often do, without ceremony, without warning, just the alarm at 5 and the iron on the board, and the uniform hanging where he had left it the night before. Linda met him at 8 o'clock outside the executive suite. She had a lanyard with a new badge, a folder of building access codes, and the particular expression of someone delivering a briefing they have rehearsed but still aren't comfortable giving. She walked him through the role in 15 minutes. Calendar management, correspondence, travel coordination, meeting prep. She spoke quickly and used phrases like high standards and specific preferences in the careful way people use language when they mean something harsher and can't say it directly. Before she left, she handed him a binder. "This is unofficial," she said. "It doesn't leave the floor." Then she walked away. Marcus set the binder on the assistant's desk, his desk now, at least temporarily, and opened his laptop. He did not read the binder until his lunch break. The break room on 14 smelled like burnt coffee and the faint residue of someone's reheated lunch. Marcus sat at the far end of the table with the binder open and ate the sandwich he had made at 6 that morning while Imani was still sleeping. He read slowly. 11 names. Dates of hire. Dates of departure. Duration of service listed in a column on the right. The first assistant had lasted 3 weeks. The second, 4. By the 6th, someone had made it to 7 weeks. The most recent had managed 9. He read the column twice. The pattern was not subtle. Each person had held on a little longer than the one before, which meant Victoria's tactics changed once she identified staying power. She escalated. She calibrated her pressure to the specific weight required to break each new person, and she kept calibrating until she found it. Marcus closed the binder. He finished his sandwich. He did not mention the pattern to Linda when he passed her in the hallway 20 minutes later. The afternoon began at 1 o'clock when Victoria appeared in the doorway of the assistant's office and looked at the desk the way she had looked at him in the hallway on Tuesday, assessing, skeptical, not yet decided. She gave him 4 tasks, no context for any of them. 2 required information she had not provided. When he walked to her office doorway to ask a clarifying question about the 3rd item, she was on a call. She held up one finger without looking at him. When the call ended, she told him, in front of 2 senior staff members who happened to be present, that a competent assistant anticipated what was needed rather than interrupting to ask. He returned to the desk. He found the information he needed through other channels. He completed all 4 tasks by 4:45. At 5 o'clock, he began organizing his workspace for the following morning. This was when Victoria appeared again with 3 new items, each marked urgent, each requiring work that could not realistically be completed before the building closed. Marcus looked at the list. He noted the time. He completed the first item in 40 minutes and the second in 30. The third required a conference call with a firm in London that was already past business hours. He wrote a note on clean paper. Specific and brief, he would complete the London coordination at 8 the following morning and have a response to her by 9, and left it centered on the desk where she would see it. Then he picked up his jacket and walked to the elevator. The drive to Mrs. Flores's apartment took 12 minutes. The lights were on in the living room window, which they should not have been at this hour, because Imani's bedtime was 7:30, and it was now 7:51. Mrs. Flores opened the door before he knocked. She was 62 and had lived next door to them for 3 years, and she spoke to Marcus with the directness of a woman who had earned the right to say what she meant. "She waited up," Mrs. Flores said. "I couldn't get her down. She wanted to tell you about the poster board." "I know," Marcus said. "Thank you." She fell asleep on the couch around 7. I put her in her bed. He thanked her again. She handed him the key to his own apartment, which she kept for emergencies, and went back inside. His apartment was quiet and slightly warm. The kitchen light was on. He had left it on that morning, as he always did, so it wouldn't be dark when Imani got home from school. He moved through the hallway without turning on any other lights. Her door was open 3 inches. He stood in the gap and looked at her. She was on her side facing the wall, one arm tucked under the pillow, the small rise and fall of her breathing steady and slow. Her backpack was on the floor where she had dropped it. The poster board she had mentioned in her voice memo was leaning against the wall beside the desk, still blank, waiting. He stood there for a long time. He had structured his entire life around a single promise that he would be present, that he would be there, that the distance which had once defined him would define him no longer. He had kept that promise for 4 years. He had been rigid about it in the way of men who know what it costs to break the things that matter. Today was the first day of a new job, and he had already come home to a dark apartment and a child asleep before he arrived. He pulled her door back to its original gap. He walked to the kitchen. He sat down at the table and looked at his hands for a moment, then reached for his phone and set his alarm for 5. One day? He told himself it was one day, but he had read that binder. He knew what the pattern said, and standing in that hallway, looking at 11 names and the numbers beside them, a thought had arrived that he had not been able to fully set aside. He had lasted one day. The question was what day 11 was going to look like. The second week began the way the first had ended, with Marcus at the kitchen table at 5 in the morning, his laptop open, the rest of the apartment dark and quiet. Victoria had sent 4 emails after 11 p.m. He worked through them in order, the way he worked through everything. One by one, no wasted motion. The coffee in his mug went cold before he remembered to drink it. By the time Imani's alarm went off down the hall, 2 of the 4 were done. He made her breakfast, checked her bag, walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped. She was still half asleep and her backpack was on one shoulder instead of 2, which she only did when she hadn't slept well. He adjusted the strap without saying anything. She leaned against him for 3 seconds while they waited. The bus came. She got on. He walked back to the apartment, finished the remaining emails, and left for Meridian. Tuesday's correction came during a department head meeting Marcus had organized himself. He had confirmed the room, sent the calendar invites, prepared the agenda at Victoria's instruction. When the agenda arrived in her inbox that morning, she read it, said nothing, and walked into the meeting. Halfway through, she stopped the discussion and told the room that the supporting data for the third agenda item was incomplete. It was not in the brief she had given him. He knew that. She knew that. The 7 people around the table did not know that, and she did not clarify it for them. "We'll revisit when the materials are correct," she said, and moved to the next item. Marcus wrote a note on the pad in front of him. He completed the missing data by 2 o'clock and placed it on her desk without comment. She did not acknowledge it. The coffee machine on the 14th floor made a sound like a small engine struggling. Someone had set it wrong. Marcus fixed it on his way back from the printer. Wednesday brought a different tactic. Victoria praised him. Specifically, and in front of witnesses, a scheduling conflict he had resolved without being asked. 2 competing external meetings that would have overlapped on her calendar. She told Linda it was the first time in months that her Thursday had been handled correctly. By Thursday afternoon, she had assigned him a task that required information from the scheduling conflict he had resolved, then informed him at 4:50 that the task was late. She had given him the assignment at 4:15. She had not mentioned the deadline. He stayed until 6:30 to complete it. Mrs. Flores could not stay past 9 on Thursdays. He had known that since the first week. He called her from the parking garage at 6:45 to tell her he was on his way. She told him Imani had eaten and done her homework and was watching a show in the living room. He thanked her. When he got home, Imani was already in her pajamas. She had put herself to bed. More or less, she was in his chair in the living room, with her legs tucked under her, which was what she did when she was waiting for him, but didn't want to look like she was waiting for him. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. He sat on the couch across from her. The TV was off. "How was your day?" he said. She shrugged. "Regular." He nodded. She looked at him for a moment with the particular attention she applied to things she was deciding whether to say. She said nothing. She got up, kissed him on the cheek, and went to bed. He sat in the quiet for a while after that. Friday was the download. He picked her up at 3:15 and she climbed into the passenger seat and began talking before he had fully pulled away from the curb. Her teacher. A girl in her class who had done something confusing at lunch. The poster board, which now had the outline of 3 sections and 1 drawing, she was considering changing. She asked him twice what he thought about the drawing, and he told her both times that he thought it was right the way it was. At a stoplight on North Druid Hills, she looked at him. "You look tired," she said. "I'm okay," he said. She looked at him a moment longer with the same evaluating attention as the night before. Then she turned to the window. 3 minutes later, without explaining why, she reached over and changed the radio from the news station to the music station he listened to when he was driving alone. She did not say anything about it. She just turned it on and looked back out the window. He drove the rest of the way home with his hands easy on the wheel and the low sound of a guitar filling the car and something working quietly in his chest that he did not have a name for. That same week, late on Wednesday evening, there had been a moment in the corridor outside the executive suite. Marcus had come from the printer with a bound report for Victoria's 7 a.m. meeting. He had stopped near the window to check the page count. The corridor was empty except for Deja, who was coming from the opposite direction with her laptop bag over one shoulder, heading for the elevators. She slowed when she saw him. He was standing with the report in both hands, checking the pages one by one. Still, methodical. His eyes moved across each page with an economy of focus that had nothing to do with reading a report, and everything to do with the particular way certain people assess things quickly, thoroughly, missing nothing. Deja stopped walking. She stood there for 3 seconds, watching him, her hand on the strap of her bag. There was something in the way he stood, the way his weight was distributed, the way he faced the window but was aware of the hallway in both directions at once, the way she could feel it even from 15 feet away. She had seen that quality before. She could not place where. She kept walking. She pressed the elevator button. She rode down to the lobby and walked out into the Atlanta evening. And the whole way to her car she was turning it over in her mind. That stillness, that specific and particular stillness, trying to find the drawer in her memory where it belonged. She couldn't find it yet, but she didn't stop looking. Deja stayed late on a Thursday. That was not unusual. She often stayed late. The 14th floor cleared out by 6:30 most evenings, and she had learned that the quiet hours after 7 were the only time she could think without someone placing a request on her desk. She liked the building when it was empty. The hum of it. The particular quality of office light when nobody was performing for anyone. She had not planned to search his name. It started as something smaller than a decision, a name typed into a search field, the way you type anything you can't stop thinking about, half expecting nothing. Marcus Webb. The first results were ordinary. A LinkedIn profile with no photograph, minimal detail, listed as facilities staff at Meridian. A background check aggregator with an Atlanta address and a previous Georgia address before that. Nothing that explained the hallway on Tuesday. Nothing that explained the corridor on Wednesday evening, the way he had stood at the window with the report in his hands, aware of everything without appearing to look at anything. She scrolled. The third page was where it changed. A PDF citation from a security industry publication, dated 2014. A commendation listed among the year's notable private sector personnel. The name was the same. The affiliation beside it was not Meridian Capital Group. It was Aegis Group International. She sat forward. Aegis was not a name she recognized immediately. She cross-referenced it in a separate tab. What came back was not a company website. What came back was a series of references in defense contracting databases, a State Department vendor registry, and a single paragraph in a congressional subcommittee report on private security expenditures from 2015. The paragraph described Aegis as a close protection firm, operating in high-risk environments for government and corporate clients. The language was bureaucratic and careful, the kind of language used when the full sentence cannot be written in a document that might be requested under the Freedom of Information Act. Deja went back to the citation. She searched the publication's archive for the full article. It was behind a subscription wall. She found a cached version from a security industry forum. The article was about personnel recognized for conduct in the field. There was a photograph. Marcus was younger in it. His jaw was the same. His posture was the same, that particular uprightness that she had been trying to categorize all week. That quality of a man whose body had been trained to occupy space with intention. He was wearing a dark suit. He was standing behind and slightly to the left of a man whose face she recognized. She stared at the screen for a long moment. She recognized the face because she had seen it on the news years ago, during a summit that had briefly been the subject of a security incident that was reported on for 2 days and then went quiet, in the way that certain stories go quiet when people in positions of authority decide they should. Her finger moved the cursor to a new search. Johannesburg.2017, Aegis Group Incident. What came back was almost nothing. 3 references. 2 were redacted summaries on a government contractor database, accessible only with credentials she did not have. The third was the edge of a report, a filing number, a date, a location, and a classification level that stopped her the way a locked door stops a hand mid-reach. She sat with that for a moment. The office was very quiet. The ventilation system made its low, constant sound. Somewhere in the building an elevator moved between floors. Deja closed the laptop. She did not close it because she had lost interest. She closed it because she had found the edge of something much larger than a facilities assistant's employment history, and she needed to sit with that before she decided what to do with it. Across the building, in the corner office that occupied the southeast edge of the 14th floor, the lights were still on. Victoria was at her desk when the notification arrived from building security. She read it twice. It was formal language, the kind security departments used when they wanted to convey seriousness without conveying alarm, though the distinction between the two was thinner than the memo suggested. A former partner of the firm, Gerard Sloan, terminated 8 months prior, following a dispute over equity distribution that had become, in the months since, a documented pattern of threatening communications. The most recent communication had crossed a legal threshold. Building security had flagged it, law enforcement had been notified. A contracted protection firm was being engaged as a precaution. Victoria set the memo down on her desk. She picked up her phone and made 2 calls, one to the head of building security, one to Linda. Both calls were brief. Her voice during them was level and controlled, the voice she used in board meetings when the numbers were worse than projected, and she needed the room to believe the numbers were manageable. When the calls were done, she sat for a moment without moving. Then she opened her laptop and returned to the document she had been working on before the notification arrived. She did not change her schedule. She did not cancel her external meeting for the following day. She did not, under any circumstances, allow the possibility of fear to rearrange her calendar. Nobody told Marcus. He found out the next morning the way he found out most things in that building, by observing what was different. 2 men in the lobby who had not been there the day before. Jackets slightly too formal for the building's business casual standard. The particular way they stood near the security desk, close enough to see the entrance but angled to keep the elevators in view. Marcus signed in at the facilities desk. He looked at the 2 men for 4 seconds. Then he walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 14th floor, and stood with his hands at his sides while the doors closed. 4 seconds had been enough. He had already seen the problem. The call from building security came at 9:14 in the morning. Marcus was at his desk on the 14th floor when he heard the shift in the lobby, not the call itself, which went to the security desk 2 floors below, but the effect of it moving upward through the building. A door closed faster than usual. Two of the contracted agents, who had been stationed near the elevator bank since morning, straightened in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with information just received. He watched them from across the corridor for 3 seconds. Then he went back to his screen. An hour later, Linda appeared in the assistant's doorway. Her face was arranged carefully, the way people arrange their faces when they are carrying news they have been told to carry calmly. She said Sloan had called the security desk directly. She said the contracted firm was adjusting its protocols. She said Victoria was aware and had decided to proceed with her afternoon commitments as scheduled. Marcus nodded. Linda waited, as though expecting something more. He gave her nothing more. She left. At noon, Victoria came to the doorway herself. She was dressed for an external meeting, a different quality of attention in her clothing, the kind that meant she was going somewhere she intended to be seen. "You'll accompany me this afternoon," she said. "Logistics support." It was not a question. Marcus looked at his screen. The time was 12:04. Imani's presentation started at 4:30. The school was 22 minutes from Meridian without traffic. Victoria's external meeting was at 2 across town, at a venue he had already looked up when he saw it on her calendar, because knowing locations was a habit he had never been able to stop. He calculated the return time. Best case, 6 o'clock. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He texted Mrs. Wright, Flores, from the elevator. Her reply came before they reached the lobby. She had a medical appointment at 4 that she could not move. She was sorry. He called the school from the car, riding in the back seat while Victoria reviewed documents beside him. A contracted agent in the front passenger seat who kept checking his mirrors at intervals that told Marcus the man was following a protocol rather than reading the environment. Marcus kept his voice low and his words brief. The school administrator said she would let Imani's teacher know. She said she was sorry, too. He said thank you and ended the call. He put the phone in his pocket. The meeting venue was a hotel conference room on the west side of the city, all recessed lighting and the smell of carpet that had been cleaned recently and often. Victoria moved through the room, the way she always moved, through rooms with the assumption that the space would arrange itself around her. Marcus did not sit. He stood near the door at an angle that gave him the full room and both exits without appearing to monitor either. He watched the exits. He watched the contractor agent stationed near the lobby entrance, whose eyes kept drifting to his phone. He watched the secondary door at the back of the room, which nobody had been assigned to cover. He shifted his position twice over the course of the meeting, each time to a spot that was slightly better than the last. Nobody noticed. At 5:47 they returned to the car. The drive back to Meridian took 31 minutes in evening traffic. Marcus sat with his hands on his knees and watched Atlanta move past the window. The school presentation had ended at 5:30. He knew this without checking. He asked to be dropped at the garage entrance rather than the main lobby. Victoria did not look up from her phone when she agreed. He sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes after the call ended. He had called Imani from the car just after 6. She answered on the first ring. He knew from the speed of it, that she had been holding the phone. She said it was okay before he could say he was sorry. He said he was sorry anyway. A pause. Then her voice, smaller than usual but very steady, the voice of a child who has decided to be brave about something and has not quite finished deciding. "Daddy," she said, "I don't want you to keep shrinking. You're not small. And I need you to know that I know that." He said nothing for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He sat in the car after the call and looked at the concrete wall of the parking garage. The fluorescent light above his car flickered twice and held. Somewhere deeper in the structure, a car door closed and footsteps moved toward the elevator. 11 minutes. He thought about the binder Linda had given him. 11 names. The ones who had left before the job could cost them anything that couldn't be replaced. He had thought, reading it, that the number was a warning. He understood now that it was something else. It was a record of every person who had decided at some point that the cost was too high. He got out of the car. He did not go to the elevator that led to the lobby. He went to the one that went up, back to the 14th floor, which was empty now except for the contracted agent near the stairwell door who was checking his phone again. Marcus walked past him without a word and moved to the far end of the corridor, where the building's emergency protocols were posted in a laminated sheet inside a red-framed box beside the fire suppression panel. He read the protocols. He had read them before, in his first week, but that was a different kind of reading. This was the other kind. He began to work. He did not announce what he was doing. He did not explain it to the contracted agent, who looked up once and then looked away, uncertain how to categorize what he was seeing. Marcus moved through the floor with the same unhurried economy he used for everything, checking, adjusting, repositioning, noting. And by the time he was finished, the building's evening security posture was something different than it had been an hour before. Not because anyone had asked him to change it, because he had looked at it and seen the problem, and he was not the kind of man who saw problems and left them for someone else. Not anymore. The alarm came at 7:41. Marcus heard it the way he heard most things before it fully registered as sound, as a change in the building's rhythm. A half-second of wrong silence followed by the pulse of the fire alarm system rolling through the floors, in sequence, floor by floor, the way it was designed to do. He was in the corridor outside Victoria's office. She was still at her desk. The contracted agents were stationed at the elevator bank 30 feet away. The alarm was manual. He knew this because the building's automated system triggered from the basement up, and this one had started on the second floor, the service level, where the maintenance credential access points were located. He knew the access points because he had studied the building's layout in his first week, the way he studied every building he spent significant time in, the way he had done for 11 years before he decided to stop. Old habits. He moved to Victoria's doorway. "We need to move," he said. She looked up from her desk. Her expression was the one she wore when someone interrupted her with something she considered beneath the moment. "It's probably, now," he said. The word was quiet. It was also not a suggestion. Something in the register of it reached her before her objection did. She stood. Down the corridor, the contracted agents were moving toward the primary stairwell exit, the correct response to a fire alarm, the response written in every protocol binder the contracted firm had issued them. Marcus watched them go and did not follow. The primary stairwell was the most direct route down from the second floor to the 14th. If someone had entered on 2 with a maintenance credential and pulled an alarm to clear the building, the primary stairwell was exactly where they would be moving through. He put his hand on Victoria's arm, not grabbing, just directing, and moved her away from the primary exit. Down the corridor. Past the conference room. To the interior wall beside the secondary stairwell door, which was a fire door that locked from outside and could only be opened from within. He positioned her with her back to the wall and the stairwell door between her and the corridor. "Stay here," he said. He took out his phone. He did not call building security. He called 911, and when the dispatcher answered, he gave her the address, the floor, and a situation assessment in 8 words that communicated more than most people conveyed in 3 minutes. Then he asked to be transferred to the responding unit's channel. The dispatcher hesitated for 1 second. He gave her a protocol identifier, a number sequence used by a small set of licensed close protection operatives when communicating with law enforcement in active situations. He had not used it in 4 years. It still worked. The transfer went through. The responding officer's voice came on the line. Marcus spoke quietly and without hesitation. He described Sloane's likely entry point, He described the route from the second-floor service level to the 14th-floor executive suite, and the two choke points in that route where an apprehension was most achievable without risk to building occupants. He described Sloane's physical profile from the photograph in the security notification he had read over Linda's shoulder 3 days ago, when she had not thought to shield the screen from the man she still thought of as the assistant. The officer said, "Copy that. Hold position." Marcus held position. The building was loud with the alarm and quiet with the absence of people. Everyone else had gone down. The contracted agents had followed their protocol. The floor was empty except for the two of them. Victoria against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest, her breathing audible and controlled in the way of someone working very hard at controlled breathing, and Marcus beside the stairwell door, phone to his ear, watching the corridor. 4 minutes and 30 seconds passed. The alarm stopped. 2 minutes after that, the radio traffic through his phone shifted in tone shorter transmissions, the specific brevity of officers communicating a secured situation. He heard a location. 3rd-floor stairwell landing. Sloane had not reached 14. Marcus lowered the phone. He looked at Victoria. She was still against the wall. Her jacket was slightly off-center from where she had pressed herself back, and one strand of hair had come loose from the arrangement she had maintained through every working hour of every day he had known her. Her eyes were on him. He said, "It's done." She didn't move immediately. Her chest rose and fell twice. 3 plainclothes officers came through the stairwell door 7 minutes later. The lead detective, a compact man with a gray jacket and the particular economy of movement that came from 2 decades of entering rooms where things had already gone wrong, swept the floor quickly, confirmed the space, and then looked at Marcus. "Anyone else up here?" he said. "No," Marcus said. The detective looked at the corridor, at the position Marcus had chosen, at the door between Victoria and the primary access route. He looked at the phone still in Marcus's hand. He looked at Marcus. "Which firm are you with?" he said. "Facilities," Marcus said. The detective held his gaze for a long moment. His expression did not change. He did not argue. The way you don't argue with something that is technically true and practically meaningless, because the argument would require more explanation than either of them was going to offer in this corridor on this evening. He nodded once and moved on. The building gradually refilled with sound radio transmissions, distant voices, the elevator resuming operation. Victoria had not moved from the wall. The strand of hair was still loose. She was looking at Marcus with an expression he had not seen on her face before, in all the weeks he had spent absorbing the full weight of what she was capable of directing at another person. She was looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" she said. The meeting started at 8 o'clock. Marcus had been summoned to wait outside the conference room, which was how institutions communicated that a person was both necessary and not yet welcome. He sat in the chair beside the door and listened to the muffled rhythm of voices inside the particular cadence of people who are trying to solve a problem while also deciding who is responsible for it. Linda had told him the night before, in a brief call, that the board wanted to discuss the incident. She had used the word incident in the careful way that lawyers use it. She had also told him to come at 8 and to bring nothing. He came at 8 and brought nothing. The conference room had glass walls frosted to shoulder height. Above the frosting he could see the shapes of people, 7 seated, 2 standing. Victoria's posture was recognizable from any angle. She stood at the far end of the table, which was where she always stood when she needed the room to feel that the conversation was hers. At 8:22 the door opened and a man in a gray suit asked Marcus to come in. The table was long and polished and reflected the overhead lights in a way that made everyone's hands look slightly unreal. 7 board members. Linda beside the wall. Victoria at the far end. 2 empty chairs near the door, one for Marcus, one, apparently, for no one. The board member who had opened the door sat down. He was the one who spoke first. Mr. Webb, last night you took actions outside the scope of your contracted role. You communicated directly with law enforcement, repositioned personnel, and made operational decisions without authorization. We need to understand the liability implications. Marcus looked at him. Yes, he said. The board member waited for more. Marcus offered nothing more. The board member glanced at his colleagues and continued. Outside in the corridor, heels on the floor. Then the conference room door opened again. Deja walked in. She was not invited. She was not on the call sheet Linda had circulated the previous evening. She walked to the table, set a printed document face down in the center, and remained standing. Nobody asked her to leave, possibly because nobody had processed her presence quickly enough to form the objection, and by the time they had, she had already begun. She picked up the document and read. She read without looking up. Her voice was level and unhurried, the voice of someone who had decided exactly how this was going to go and had made peace with every consequence. She read the Marine Service record first. Force reconnaissance, 8 years, 2 combat deployments, commendation for valor. Then the transition to Aegis Group International Executive Protection, 11 years, government contracts, named clients at the cabinet level. Then the industry commendation, the one she had found in the cached article, the one from 2014. Then the edges of the Johannesburg incident, the filing number, the date, the classification level, and the reason a mid-level analyst at a private investment firm could not read further. She did not editorialize. She did not say what she thought it meant. She read the record the way you read facts, because facts, stated clearly and completely, do not require commentary. When she finished, she placed the document on the table. The room was very quiet. One of the board members, a woman near the center of the table, looked at Victoria. "Did you know any of this?" she said. "No," Victoria said. Her voice was even. Her face gave nothing away. But Marcus, who had spent 3 weeks watching her perform composure under pressure, could see the particular stillness around her eyes that meant she was processing something she had not been given time to prepare for. The board member at the head of the table turned to Marcus. "Is what she read accurate?" he said. "Yes," Marcus said. A pause. "Why didn't you disclose it?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "No one asked," he said. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one after Deja had finished reading. That silence had been shock. This one was something older and less comfortable. The silence of a room full of powerful people confronting the specific implications of having dismissed someone without inquiring who he was first. Deja was still standing. She had not been invited to sit and had not sat. She looked at no one in particular and everyone in general in the manner of someone who has said what needed to be said and is now simply waiting for the room to catch up. One board member leaned over to another. A murmur. A pen set down. Victoria had not moved from the end of the table. She was looking at Marcus with the same expression she had worn in the corridor the night before, that unfamiliar quality in her face, the one that did not belong to any version of her that this building had previously seen. "I'd like the room," she said. It was not a request. It had the syntax of a request and the force of something else entirely. The board members looked at each other. Then, one by one, they gathered their folders and their phones and their water glasses and filed out. Linda followed. Deja went last, and as she passed Marcus's chair she did not look at him. But the set of her shoulders said everything she had decided not to say aloud. The door closed. The conference room was quiet now, in the way that rooms are quiet when something large has just passed through them and left everything slightly rearranged. Victoria stood at her end of the table. Marcus sat at his. Between them, on the polished surface, Deja's printed document lay face up in the light. Victoria walked to the chair nearest to her and sat down, not at the head of the table, halfway down where the board members had been. She set her hands flat on the surface in front of her and looked at them for a moment, and then she looked at Marcus. "Why did you stay?" she said. "After the hallway. After everything that followed it, why didn't you just leave?" The question was quiet. It had none of the architecture of her usual questions, none of the layered implication, the performance, the audience she always seemed to be playing to, even when no audience was present. It was just a question, direct and unguarded, the kind people ask when they have run out of other ways to understand something. Marcus looked at her across the table. "My daughter is watching the kind of man I am," he said. "I won't be the kind of man who disappears when it gets hard." He paused. "I made that mistake once. I won't make it again." Victoria said nothing. She kept her hands flat on the table and her eyes on his face. Something moved through her expression, not quite recognition, not quite grief. Something that lived in the space between the two. She did not ask what mistake he meant. She understood, from the way he said it, that the answer belonged to him and not to her. The conference room held its silence for a long time. Outside the frosted glass, Atlanta went about its morning. 3 months passed, the way necessary things pass, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular steadiness of time that is being used correctly. The legal process around Sloan moved forward without drama. Marcus gave a statement to the district attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, answered every question directly, and left the building at 3:15. He did not follow the case in the news. It was handled. That was enough. Meridian's board commissioned an independent review of the firm's security infrastructure. The review took 6 weeks and produced a report that recommended, among other things, the engagement of a qualified consultant to redesign the firm's close protection protocols from the ground up. Linda called Marcus on a Wednesday morning to discuss it. He asked 3 questions: scope, timeline, and whether the hours were fixed. She answered all 3. He said he would think about it. He called her back the following morning and said yes. The contract was formal and specific. Fixed hours. Defined deliverables. Nothing past 6 on weekdays. He signed it at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening after Imani was asleep, and then he sat for his 20 minutes of quiet before bed. Mrs. Flores no longer needed to stay late. She came at 2:30 and left at 5:45, the same as she always had before the assistant assignment had bent everything out of shape. She and Marcus had not discussed the weeks in between. They did not need to. She had brought soup one evening in October, left it outside his door, knocked once, and left. He had found it 20 minutes later. That was the whole conversation. Imani's next school presentation was on a Thursday in November. She had been working on it for 3 weeks. A project on ecosystems, with a poster board that had been revised 4 times and now featured, in the top right corner, a small drawing of a bird that she had decided was essential, and that Marcus had agreed was exactly right. He sat in the front row. She stood at the front of the classroom with her poster beside her and her speaking voice, which was, he could confirm, better than before, and she talked for 6 minutes about wetlands and what they needed to survive. She did not look at him during the presentation. She was a professional, but at the end, when her teacher started to clap and the other parents joined in, she looked at the front row for exactly 1 second. He nodded. She looked back at her poster, composing herself, and then she smiled at the floor in the small private way that was only for her. Afterward, in the hallway, she put on both straps of her backpack and walked beside him toward the exit. "Did the mean lady get nicer?" she said. He thought about Victoria, the board meeting, the chair halfway down the table, the hands flat on the surface, the question she had asked when everyone else was gone. "She's working on it," he said. Imani considered this for a few steps. "That's probably enough," she said. Deja's promotion was announced in a staff memo in early December. Her new title was Senior Risk and Operations Analyst, a role that had not previously existed at Meridian and that came with a small team and a budget and the kind of authority she'd been exercising informally for 2 years without credit. She stopped Marcus in the corridor the day the memo went out. She looked at him for a moment. "You didn't need me to do that," she said. "No," he said, "but it mattered." She nodded. They went their separate ways. Victoria was glimpsed in the weeks that followed, in the particular way that changed. Things are glimpsed in the edges and peripheries, in the small adjustments that accumulate into something different. She still moved through the building with purpose. She still spoke in declaratives, but the corrections she delivered no longer required an audience. They arrived privately, specifically, without the theater. The staff noticed. They did not say so aloud, but the collective flinch that had defined the 14th floor for 14 months began, quietly, to ease. On a Sunday in December, Marcus drove with Imani to a cemetery in the northwest part of the city. The grass was brown from the cold, and the sky was the flat, pale gray of Atlanta in winter. They walked to a headstone set back from the main path, beneath a tree that had dropped most of its leaves. He stood in front of it for a long time. Imani stood beside him. She did not talk. She understood, without being told, that this was not a moment for the download. She put her hand in his. He put his other hand on the stone. He did not speak. There was nothing he could say in this place that he had not already said in every morning alarm, every ironed uniform, every 40-minute drive with the radio on, and a 9-year-old talking about her day. Everything he had done for 4 years was the sentence. He did not need to say it again here. After a while, they turned and walked back to the car. He drove. She talked. A girl in her class. The bird drawing. Whether wetlands were the same as swamps, which she had looked up and they were not, which she felt was important. He listened to every word. The city moved past the windows. The heater ran. Atlanta in December was gray and warm enough, and the road back home was clear, and his daughter's voice filled the car the way it always did on the days he had kept his promise to be there completely, without gaps, without interruption. He did not interrupt once. There is a kind of man the world sees every day and never looks at the man who shows up, who endures, who makes himself small so that someone he loves can feel safe enough to grow. The world mistakes his silence for emptiness. It mistakes his stillness for nothing. It points at him in crowded hallways and asks what exactly he does that a lesser thing couldn't do, what the world does not understand, what Victoria Haynes learned in a conference room with the door closed. What a 9-year-old girl had always known is that the most extraordinary thing a man can do is refuse to let the world's opinion of him become his opinion of himself. Marcus Webb ironed his uniform every morning before his daughter woke up. Not because anyone noticed, because she did.